आदरणीय अखिलेश भार्गव जी, आदरणीय चंद्रशेखर जी, डॉक्टर पावलेकर और देसाई जी, मैं आभारी हूँ कि आपने इस तरह मेरा स्वागत किया। मद्रास से हूँ, कोशिश करूँगा थोड़ी सी बात हिंदू में तो अंग्रेजी में बात करूँगा। आखिर में एक संक्षेप रूप से जो मैंने अंग्रेजी में कहा उसे हिंदी में भी कहूँगा, लेकिन आपको 5-10 मिनट मुझे ज़्यादा देना पड़ेगा। फिल्म्स में मेरा यहाँ आना मैं महत्वपूर्ण समझता हूँ, इसलिए कि राष्ट्रीय सुरक्षा के जो अभी टास्क फोर्स बने थी, नरेश चंद्रा टास्क फोर्स, जिसमें बॉम्बे के डॉक्टर अनिल ककोलकर भी शामिल थे, हमने पूरे राष्ट्रीय सुरक्षा की जांच की और कुछ सिफारिशें दी। और राष्ट्रीय सुरक्षा को हमने सिर्फ सेना या विदेश नीति तक सीमित नहीं रखा। ऊर्जा की समस्या, कृषि की समस्याएं, सुरक्षा जो का मतलब यह है कि आम आदमी को, आम आदमी पार्टी ने आम आदमी को सुरक्षा मिले, और इसके लिए ऊर्जा की भी जरूरत है, कृषि प्रगति की जरूरत है। तो सब पर हमने जांच लिया। 18 महीने गुजर गए हैं, सरकार जाने की अभी तक उस रिपोर्ट को उन्होंने सार्वजनिक क्यों नहीं किया? शायद कुछ काम करनी पड़ती। अब कई बातें हुई यहाँ। भार्गव साहब ने कहा, पहले जनरल साहब ने कहा कि कुछ 3-4 साल पहले जब भारत के में 5 महाशक्ति के नेता यहाँ पहुँचे, और फिर भार्गव साहब ने समझाया कि कैसे हमारी छवि बिगड़ गई है और कैसे हम आजकल जो समस्याएं हमारे सामने हैं और रिश्ते भी बिगड़ गए हैं हर एक के साथ। तो हुआ क्या 3-4 सालों में? हम सब जानते हैं महंगाई, आर्थिक स्थिति तो बिगड़ी, लेकिन बात ये याद रखना चाहिए, अगर देश की अर्थव्यवस्था ठीक ना हो तो कोई आपका इज्जत नहीं करता। असलियत ये है आज की दुनिया में। और दूसरी बात यह है कि विदेश नीति जरूर हमने अच्छा ढांचा बनाया, लेकिन क्या हम अपने जो लोगों को विश्वास देते हैं, आश्वासन देते हैं, हम उसे पूरा करने पाते हैं? आपने श्रीलंका और बांग्लादेश का जिक्र किया, और जनरल साहब ने कहा, आए थे म्यांमार को, बर्मा को, जब मैं वहाँ था जनरल जोशी के साथ, तो हमने कई वहाँ प्रोजेक्ट बनाए थे, लेकिन 13 साल गुजर गए हैं, वो अधूरे रहे। अगर एक सड़क बनाना हो जिससे आपकी उत्तर पूर्वी क्षेत्र को सागर से मिलाना है, तो वो सिर्फ म्यांमार के जरिए कर सकते हैं। लेकिन अगर वो सड़क बनाने के लिए 1 साल के बजाय 10 साल लेते हैं, तो कौन आप पर विश्वास करेगा? यही बात है दूसरी चीज़ों की इम्प्लीमेंटेशन में। तो कुछ दिन पहले एक म्यांमार के पुराने दोस्त मुझसे मिले और उन्होंने मुझसे कहा, पार्था वाई इज इंडिया नॉट अ मेंबर ऑफ नेटो? मैंने कहा, भाई हम नॉर्थ लैंड हैं, हम नेटो के मेंबर कैसे बने? इसे नहीं, वो नेटो नहीं है, नॉर्थ अटलांटिक ट्रीटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन। मेरा कहना, आपका नेटो इज नो एक्शन टॉक ओनली। तो अगर ये हाल हो कि आप अपने दिए गए वचन को पूरा ना करें, चाहे वो श्रीलंका के राष्ट्रपति हो या एक मैत्रीपूर्ण नेता जैसे शेख हसीना बांग्लादेश में हो, तो कौन आपको इज्जत करेगा? तो चलिए, बात ये रही। अब इससे मेन सब्जेक्ट में आऊँगा, and I shall now turn to Hindi and of course English and then return. We're discussing Israel, India and Iran, the 3 eyes in this region. I think it's an appropriate subject to discuss, particularly in Bombay, because you face the West Coast. Historically, your trade has been, your connections have been with the West Coast and the western neighbors of India. That is true of the entire West Coast, extending from Kerala to Mumbai and even into Surat and Gujarat. So it is only appropriate that we deal with this here and discuss it here, because this is an issue which you must discuss the Gulf, because the states on the West Coast, you are crucial for the conduct of diplomacy in the Gulf. And just remember one thing, in those 6 Gulf Arab states, starting with Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, Oman, the fact is in those 6 states, there are 6 million Indians who live. They remit back $40 billion every year. We look after our NRIs in the United States. They are very comfortable. But don't forget, the Indian economy survives because of these remittances. Particularly in these days when we've messed up our economy so much that we almost faced an economic downgrade. So this region is crucial to us. And in this world, Iran fits in. I will come to how Iran fits in, but for us, and the situation now prevailing, how does Iran fit in? Iran fits in for 2 reasons. Firstly, because for years, a large amount of our oil supplies have come from there. Second, the fact of the matter is that the Iranians, you must remember, are a proud civilization. They distinctly the Iranians are a proud civilization. They regard themselves as very different from their Arabs. I mean, if we speak in respect of both the Iranians and the Arabs, but the Iranians don't exactly have entertained that feeling towards their Arab neighbors, because historically, Arabs went outwards after the coming of Islam. And Iran, historically, for centuries has looked outwards. And if you go back to their relationship with Israel, it's been a mixed one. When the Jews fled Israel, of course they went to Babylon, but a large number of them came to Iran. Yes, in 2 waves. Then there was the period of Nebuchadnezzar when they had problems in Babylon. But ultimately, it was Cyrus the Great who freed the Jews. And then, I have a problem. I go to Israel and I listen to them talking nothing but about Iran. And I said, hey, I'm not come here to discuss Iran. And I go to Tehran, they discuss nothing about how bad our relationship with Israel is. So I always keep telling my Iranian friends, listen, we don't choose your friends for you, we know precisely what you're doing with Pakistan. And don't choose our friends for us. So I think this is a factor you have to bear in mind. One, in the conduct of policy, don't let anybody else tell you who your friend should be. First make an assessment on your national interest, who's to be your friend and what you gain, and do what you think is right. Another thing is, I don't think at this point in time it's worthwhile for us to get involved in centuries-old disputes. But coming back to the Israeli-Iran connection, I mean, in the days of the Shah, the Jewish community was absolutely delighted. The Torah was respected by the Shah personally. But then came the revolutionary government. And I've often asked myself as to why the revolutionary government turned against Israel. One, of course, was the paranoia of the connection between SAVAK and the Mossad, which concerned them. The other, more importantly, was the United States became an enemy. And the third was the United States alliance with Saudi Arabia and the Arab states. And I will come to where that is at the present moment. Now, in the meantime, matters got complicated with A.Q. Khan supplying from his nuclear Walmart, as it is known, the centrifuges to Iran. The Pakistanis played it beautifully. A.Q. Khan was provided with Iran with the know-how to make nuclear weapons. And in fairness, this is the difference between Iran and its Gulf Arab neighbors. Iran had the technological ingenuity to build on what it got. And believe me, as the Shia-Sunni differences grow, I would not be surprised within the next few years if Saudi Arabia turns to Pakistan for nuclear security. These are the challenges you face in this region, because already CSS-2 missiles that Saudi Arabia have are supplied by China. Both China and Pakistan proliferate, whether it is with Saudi Arabia. When I was High Commissioner in Pakistan, Prince Sultan, I think it was then Defense Minister of Saudi Arabia, was the first foreigner, apart from the Chinese, who was granted access to the nuclear facilities of Pakistan. Of course, the Chinese were in and out. And really, and the other factor you must remember is that there is no such thing as a Pakistani nuclear weapon. There is a Chinese nuclear weapon. There are Chinese-made designed nuclear weapons in Pakistan. Pakistan's enrichment facilities were upgraded by China. And interestingly, we are still seeing and still assessing whether those things of upgraded centrifuges were passed on from Pakistan to Iran. That is still a question mark. And but the fact of the matter is, the Iranians went about it in a very determined manner, despite every effort by the United States to stop them. But the worst is American hypocrisy. America looked the other way when Pakistan was given its nuclear weapons designs by China. And we gave them a lot of evidence, and they say, sorry, we have no evidence. Now if you see the writings, they knew that the first Pakistani nuclear weapon was tested not in 1998, but in 1990 in Xinjiang, in Chinese territory. So I think these are the realities of our immediate neighborhood. Then came Afghanistan, and this is where our relationship with Afghanistan became close. When the Taliban was backed by the ISI, even the Harkatul Mujahideen was trained in Afghan territory. The so-called jihad in Kashmir then was run from a place called Khost in southern Afghanistan, where the Harkatul Mujahideen was trained. It's a different matter, the Americans accidentally bombed them and accidentally did us a favor. That's another story. But the reality is that at that point in time, we had no presence in Afghanistan. The only presence we could have was in Mazar-e-Sharif, then under the control of Ahmad Shah Massoud and the Northern Alliance. And to reach there, we had to go through Iran. And to be honest with you, I can talk this frankly now, I wouldn't talk about it 10 years ago. The Northern Alliance and the anti-Taliban elements were sustained by an alliance of Russia, Iran, and India. And therefore, when the Americans walked in, when a new government had to be formed in Bonn, it was India which persuaded the Iranians, don't come in the way and insist on your favorites being in government. Let the Afghans decide it themselves, and we'll get the Americans to move along. So there is a role which we have played. That was during Mr. Vajpayee's time, when in Bonn. So I think Iran became crucial to us at that point in time. And it remains crucial for us in many ways, because the Iranian anger with the Taliban was because the entire Shia element, the Hazaras, were being wiped out by the Taliban with Pakistani state. And that is how and bear this in mind, this Shia-Sunni factor in today's world is going to be more important to us than anything else in the Islamic world. There are going to be serious differences. And while the Iranians were very gung-ho about Israel, it's a different matter during Iran-Contra that it was through Israel that Iran got some of its weapons when it was fighting Iraqis. The reality is, in this world, there are no permanent friends and permanent enemies. Let's get this very, very straight. I'm very cynical about all this. I'm willing to talk. When I'm in Pakistan, I'm astonished to see a Madrasi narrate Urdu Shairi. I guess, but that's a different matter. Shairi is one side and relationships are another. The reality is that the Shia-Sunni differences were there to start with. Saddam Hussein was a Sunni leader who attacked Iran with American encouragement. It happened when I was in Washington, and I know that attack took place with American encouragement. And it's a different matter, the Iranians fought back, and fought back hard. So this factor has now become much more salient in the world. When the Iranians were isolated, they hit back by getting in contact with radical Arab states. They got in touch with the Syrians. They established a beachhead in Lebanon through the Hezbollah. And then George Bush did them the greatest favor. He eliminated Saddam Hussein. And Iraq became, for the first time after 150 years, the Shia majority came to rule Iraq. So George Bush did a great job for democracy in Iraq. It's a different matter that it hurt the Americans, but it changed the balance of power in the Middle East. So today, you have a Shia crescent comprising Iran, Iraq, Hezbollah, Shia minorities in Bahrain and Yemen, all together on sectarian terms. You have the Sunni majority led by Saudi Arabia, and let us not forget that the Saudis hate the Iranians so much that the Saudi king, I think it was King Fahd, told General Petraeus that America should cut off the head of the snake being Iran. Now, these are factors we have to bear in mind when we conduct policy. Whether it is towards Syria, where does Israel fit into all this? Israel naturally has concerns about the Iranian nuclear program, and because Iran is so hostile. My question is there any hostility which is permanent? I think not. The other thing is, Israel itself has around 200 nuclear weapons, and it can decimate Iran at the shortest notice. And the Iranians, as I told you, are a 2,000-year-old or are more than a 2,000 or 3,000-year-old civilization. They're not going to commit suicide, because it will amount to suicidal harakiri if they dare to attempt anything on Israel. So, on the one hand, therefore, you have these shifting alliances, and then you come to the Americans. Remarkably, I'm sorry to say, people with fickle alliances. The only permanent alliance they have got, or strong alliance they've got, is with Israel. Whether you're NATO, whether you're Japan, whether you're India, is gone. But even Israel is now learning a few lessons. The lesson is as follows. You know, as the Americans say, when you say what's gone wrong, the answer is the economy is stupid. The greatest change in geopolitics which is now coming in the world is this shale revolution in America. And that is going to change the dynamics of the Middle East. Till now, the Americans and the West were dependent on oil from the Gulf. By 2018, the United States will be producing more oil than Saudi Arabia. It will be a net exporter of gas. Gas prices are already falling, though Reliance keeps demanding more and more in India. And therefore, all these the American dependence on this region is over. But the Americans would not like to see this region get out of hand or fall totally into someone else's capability. And given organizations like the IPAC or the American Israeli Political Action Committee in US, Israel is one country which wields immense influence within the United States. Please believe me, I worked with the IPAC in my days I was in Washington. Our links with Israel and IPAC go well before that period. And the Israelis did help us out in 1965. So something we should not forget. Though we choose to pretend that they did not do so. So I think you are into a very, very complex situation today. What is the situation really which is happening? As I said, there is a Sunni alliance led by Saudi Arabia, including the Gulf Arab states, and the Gulf Arab states have nuanced positions. Oman, for example, will not do everything Saudi Arabia wants. Qatar is a country getting too big for its boots, given the size of its population, though it has huge gas resources. The United Arab Emirates will generally go along with the Saudis. Remember, it was the Saudi Arabians and the United Arab Emirates which were the only country which recognized Taliban, not because they liked the faces of the Taliban or their beards, but because the Taliban was a force they could use to squeeze Iran. So you are into this situation where I said, I gave you the Iran Shia axis. For example, today if Bashar al-Assad gets weapons and fighters, they come from an air corridor from Iran, Iraq and into Syria. So, and this is the range of forces you have against range against the Saudi alliance. Now, why is America suddenly backed off on Syria? Why is America accepting a deal now from Iran, which it could have accepted in 2003? In 2003, Iran made the same offer, which was, we will, not build weapons. We'll put all our facilities under inspection, but you will not question our right to enrich. And the Iranians have a point there. Under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, they have every right to enrich, as much as Pakistan has or India has. And mind you, we are not signatories to the NPT, so it doesn't matter. But there are at least a dozen countries who enrich. So I think, in terms of international legal order, they have a case. But the question is, why this change? In 2003, when the offer was made, they had 3,000 inverters. They could produce barely nothing, and the squeeze on the inverters and everything would have gone. Now they've got 19,000 inverters, some of them of superior quality, and building more. Why is it America is now willing to settle, which wasn't? And again, I come back to the basics. America has guarded its energy security. Latin America, including Venezuela, Mexico, and now even Argentina on shale gas, are going to become major energy suppliers. Canada to the north is a very convenient neighbor. So the US is very clear in its mind. It's going to work on economic integration with the big powers in Asia through the Pacific Ocean, and with the entire European Economic Union on its western shores. So, India, where do we come in? The answer is we don't, unless you grow at 10% in annum and become a much more viable force than you are at the present moment. So the equations are interesting. Another interesting point, within the Mediterranean and Israel's shores, there are large resources of gas and some of oil. So the Mediterranean region is going to become a new factor in the energy equations as they emerge. And all this is happening, interestingly, when Turkey, ostensibly a secular country, but with an Islamist government, suddenly ditches Israel, with whom it had good relations, and joins this Islamic front. So there is this Sunni alliance starting with the Gulf countries and extending into Turkey. And I've spoken to you about the Shia-led Iranian grouping on the other. So in this journey, a lot is happening. You have the situation in Syria. Then you have the so-called Arab Spring, where every bleeding heart liberal in the United States felt, oh, the whole Arab world is going to become democratic, which was ridiculous. You can't. Democracy it grows. It's something you get in stages. It's values you believe in. You can't suddenly say, I'm going to hold an election. Though you hold the election, it will produce your Morsi. And then everyone has to go into Parda. So what happened? The army stages a coup. And I'm glad that at least my view is that these regions being secular is in our interests. But what do we do? We did the practical thing. When Morsi wanted to come here, we welcomed him. Because it's not worthwhile for India to get involved in these internal rivalries. And these are going to grow. So Syria is in a horrible situation. I think a couple of million refugees already. There are around 100,000 casualties. But it is a bloodbath. And another point which has changed the American thing is, dynamics is, all right, you make common cause with Saudi Arabia and support Salafi-oriented groups. But what do you find? It is these very Salafi groups with linkages to Al-Qaeda who bump off your ambassador in Benghazi. It is these very groups who are now attacking the government you installed in Iraq. So there is a contradiction of interests between the United States on the one hand, Saudi Arabia and the Arabs and the Sunni world on the other. And Shia power, since the Americans are more relaxed about their energy, they are in a much better way to go ahead with dealing with the situation as it emerges. I think as far as India is concerned, where do we fit in all this? It is crucial for us that those Arab Gulf states remain stable. The stakes are too high for us. This is number one. Number two, I think the ending of Iranian isolation will be something we should welcome. For the simple reason that in the few trips I've made to Iran, I found that the middle class there has its own aspirations. They want to get back to being a normal country. I won't go into the details of this, but my understanding is you have an aspirational middle class in Iran, which is tired of being conservative. Rouhani merely reflects that sentiment of a middle class, tired of sanctions, tired of isolation from the world, just wanting to get out. How this will play out on Iranian national aspirations remains to be seen. The sanctions have worked, but then if you push a man too far, sanctions are a very nice tool, but beyond a point, when a man gets desperate, he doesn't care. But as long as you have this aspirational clause, politically you can connect to, you're on the right side. Because I don't think anybody can stop Iran if it so chooses from world. So what you can do is to build up a security environment under which they don't feel under siege, and you deal with that accordingly. I think as this process goes on, the Americans will and others will work very hard to get Iran to cool off their rhetoric on Israel. I mean, Ahmadinejad went completely haywire. I don't think you're going to find that sort of rhetoric. I mean, for an Iranian president to say that Israel should be wiped off the map, I mean, it's ridiculous. I don't think you're going to see that sort of rhetoric. It really depends on the internal equations of what works out. If this process is pushed in a direction where Iran realizes that whether it's Israel or India or the others, we're not interested in getting into their civilizational and their sectarian clashes. That is their business. But more absorbed as a part of the world, and really the only element for change, like in India, in Iran, is the middle class. They are genuinely out to it. This is a civilization which is very old. I think they've been chafing under the sort of rule they've had, and I think Rouhani symbolizes that change, but it's a very delicate thing as to how this plays out. Lastly, I'll come to the situation in Afghanistan, because that has a direct bearing. You don't mind another 5 minutes?
No, sir. You can take 10. Carry on till you attack.
The situation in Afghanistan. The Americans are packing bag and baggage to leave. And the interesting development now is that after their experiences with Al-Qaeda, the attack on them in Libya, the Americans realized that it is not the Iranians who are going to come and stage the next 9/11. That is going to come from these Salafi-oriented groups, whether they are based in Libya, whether they are based in Afghanistan or wherever. And the Americans realized one thing. They went in to clear out the swamp in Afghanistan. They have not succeeded. For a simple reason, that they refuse to accept that what we have been arguing for years, that there is a nexus between the Taliban, the ISI, and all these Salafi-oriented groups, whether it is the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, whether it is the Abu Sayyaf in Philippines, whether it is the Jamaat Islami in Bangladesh, whether it is the Harkatul Jihadul Islam in Bangladesh, whether it is the Lashkar-e-Taiba in Pakistan, the Jaish-e-Mohammed in Pakistan, all these come under one umbrella, which is called which Bin Laden formed in February 1998 in Kandahar, called the International Islamic Front for Jihad against Jews and Crusaders, Israel and the United States. These were all groupings put together for that. Later on, Hafiz Muhammad Said made that as the International Islamic Front for crusade against Jews, Hindus and Crusaders. So, this nexus, the Americans refused to acknowledge. They were in denial. Between 2000 and 2006, every time I spoke to an American and asked him, hey, how are you guys doing in Afghanistan? How are we doing? Great. Great. How many Taliban leaders have you caught or killed? 0. Where are they? Silence. They knew they were in Quetta. And they ignored it, and they're paying the price for it. But the problem is they leave. Ultimate price is going to be paid by us. Because right now, the one wing of the Taliban is turned against the Pakistani state, which is the Tehrik-e-Taliban in Pakistan, which operates from Pakistan soil. The other wing is collaborating with the ISI, the Haqqanis and so on. So they want to run with the Afghan Taliban hound, which is the Pakistani Taliban, while acting with the Haqqani network on the other. So I think they are into a deep dilemma on this. And one of the reasons they've been behaving themselves well is, at least, and General Shekhar will bear this out, at least 3 of their divisions have been shifted from the Indian border to fight on their border with Afghanistan. And I think it will serve us well if they spend a couple of more years there. The Afghan situation, therefore, is going to be a source of concern. And the Americans just don't know what to do with Pakistan. They're too busy with the Devyani Cobra Garde to worry about what's going to happen somewhat later. So I think we need to look at it. We have had a policy thus far in Afghanistan of supporting the US presence there. What are we going to do there? Iran becomes crucial. I hope, and I'm saying this publicly, I don't mind, that the next government which comes is less scared of its own shadows than the present one. Because unless you back the government in Afghanistan with whatever they want, including weapons and military training, we are going to have a problem. And you're not going to have access there unless you go through Chabahar. The only access to Afghanistan is the Chabahar port in Afghanistan, Iran. Pakistan does not give you access. Pakistan does not give you access to send wheat biscuits to Afghanistan. So strategically, Iran remains important to us. And as I said, I would sincerely hope they recognize and move ahead, and this needs to be signed. I believe ultimately that, like in the days of Cyrus the Great, the Israelis and the Iranians have the potential to live happily ever after. But certainly, much is going to depend on how you are able to bring Iranian behavior around to being a part of a larger constructive international community. India can contribute to that diplomatically, but the Iranians take their own decisions. They are quite impervious and can be even suicidal, because if you observe their behavior of self-sacrifice in the name of Imam Hussein, that is very much a trait which is a part of their post-Shiite incarnation. So you are into a complicated situation. We have opportunities. I think we should stick by our position with regard to the Palestinian process. For example, we deal with the Mahmoud Abbas and the other leadership based in who are now the recognized leadership. We keep our distance from the Hamas, though we have a mission there. So I think we should continue playing the role to push the Palestinians and the Israelis to reach a settlement. To be frank with you, and I've said this to all my Israeli friends, including the Israeli ambassador in Delhi, that it would help us all if they went a bit slow on settlements, so that you can build a Palestinian consensus which helps it resolve. So the Indian role has to be confined to this. Otherwise, if the Catholic, Protestant 15th, 14th century rivalries is being played out in the Islamic world, it's their business. We have enough problems at home there to get ourselves involved in that. मेरा कहना यह है कि अलाइन विद दिस कि जो हमारी पश्चिमी सीमाओं पर, खास तौर पर अफगानिस्तान पर, और जो खाड़ी के देश हैं जहाँ से हमारे जो तेल के आयात है, जहाँ हमारे 60 लाख लोग रहते हैं, जहाँ से $40 बिलियन हमें आते हैं, उनके साथ संबंध बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है। और मेरा कहना ये भी है कि जो मतभेद अब शिया सुन्नी के बीच में निकल रहे हैं, जो ईरानियन और सऊदी के बीच में निकल रहे हैं, उससे हमें दूर रहना है। प्रयास हमारा यही रहना है कि जहां हमारे 60 लाख लोग वहाँ बसे हुए हैं, उनकी सुरक्षा पर। और मैं ये भी कहूँगा कि जो हमारी नौसेना है, उनके जो रिश्ते हैं इन देशों के साथ, उन्हें हमें प्रोत्साहन देना पड़ेगा, चाहे वो ईरानी हो, चाहे वो अरब हो। लेकिन इन समस्याओं से दूर रहें, क्योंकि हमारे राष्ट्रीय हित का मकसद ये एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण अंग है, और राष्ट्रीय सुरक्षा का, क्योंकि शायद हमारे जो रिजर्व्स हैं तेल के 1 महीने का भी नहीं, तो निरंतर ही उनके साथ हमारे संबंध बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण हैं। और ये भी मैं कहना चाहता हूँ कि अब अमेरिकन छोड़ जा रहे हैं अफगानिस्तान में, और हमें वहाँ अफगानिस्तान पहुँचने के लिए ईरान का सहयोग बहुत ही ज़रूरी है, क्योंकि एक ही बंदरगाह है चाबहार, जहाँ से हम अपनी सामग्री ले जा सकते हैं, चाहे वो रक्षा सामग्री हो, चाहे वो बिस्कुट हो। तो पेचीदगी है, लेकिन अगर हम इसे ज़रा बुद्धिमान तरीके से इन समस्याओं को सिमटे तो अच्छा रहेगा। और ख़ास तौर पर मेरा ख्याल ये है कि अफ़गानिस्तान को, और जो मौजूदा सरकार है और जो भी चुने हुए सरकार है, उनके साथ आर्थिक और सैनिक संबंध और भी बढ़ाना चाहिए। ये हमारा राष्ट्रीय हित है, क्योंकि अगर तालिबान वहाँ सफल हुआ तो यकीन करें हमारे इंडियन मुजाहिदीन जैसे संगठनों को और प्रोत्साहन मिलेगा, और कश्मीर में जहाद फिर पुनरारंभ करेंगे। धन्यवाद।